Hi everyone, welcome back to the Internet Storyteller, where we share the latest, greatest, and sometimes the most horrific stories of the internet. Today we have a story from r/SuperNova Revenge. Never mess with your IT guy, especially in the middle of the Iraqi desert. Cross-post from r/ProRevenge. This is a fairly lengthy story, and it has a pretty good payoff in the end, but I'll include a too long didn't read for the lazy. Backstory. In 2003, I was the Director of Information Technology and Communications on a project tasked with securing Saddam's major weapons storage sites throughout Iraq, performing a comprehensive inventory of said weapons, and then destroying what we'd found. I was based at one of the largest weapons storage sites in the country, so our mission there was monumental. Blowing up 100 tons of weapons 6 days a week. Scud missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-shipping missiles, all varieties of rockets, grenades and mines heavy to light, was going to take years. In order to accomplish this, we had to build base defenses and secure an area the size of a small county. Once that was complete, we built a major support base in the middle of the Iraqi desert from scratch and all the infrastructure to support it. We're talking housing, cafeteria with full commercial kitchen, office buildings, electrical, water, and sewage systems, toilet, shower, trailers, recreational facilities, an 8-bay full-service vehicle shop motor pool, and most importantly, in my opinion, IT and communication systems, with radio, network infrastructure, servers, voice over IP phones, all connected to the outside world via satellite uplink. So here's the story. All of these facilities housed bomb explosive technicians, engineers, base support personnel, and as we had to provide our own security, private military contractors, PMC. If you're not sure what PMCs, private military contractors, are, think Blackwater or mercenaries, or look them up and you'll get the picture. Our PMCs were a mix of ex-US Special Forces, such as Army, Green Berets, Delta Force, Air Force, Pararescue SEALs, British SAS, French Foreign Legion, and ex-South African Rhodesian Special Forces. All of them were now mercenaries, and in reality, so were the rest of us to some degree. Most of the PMCs were damn good men, but when you assemble a motley crew of individuals from such disparate backgrounds, you're bound to have a couple of bad apples in the bunch. The story is about one of those bad apples, and for the purposes of this story, we'll call this bad apple Roid Rage, or RR. RR was one of the supervisory PMCs and oversaw the night watch from 2200 hours to 0600 hours, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I usually started my day around 7 a.m. and often worked until midnight, although those last few hours were generally spent surfing the internet and catching up with the folks back in the US, as Iraq is 9 hours ahead. You're in the middle of the Iraqi desert, so there's not much else to do anyways, and other than the daily 100-ton explosion at 1600 hours, 4 p.m., the internet is pretty much your primary source of entertainment. Since I was often in the office late at night, I was regularly alone in the office with Roid Rage RR for a couple of hours. As I previously mentioned, I managed the IP and IT communications infrastructure for this project, and a vital component of that infrastructure were our telephones and voice over IP phone system. All of our sites used a satellite uplink to connect to a central voice over IP server in Baghdad, which in turn connected us to the world. you could pick up any phone and dial a 5-digit extension to connect to any of our sites throughout Iraq or call any international number in the world. It was a pretty sweet setup, but it was also ripe for abuse. We tried locking down international dialing with various server rules and PIN schemes, but due to the inherent latency in satellite communications and the amount of bandwidth being consumed over a single satellite uplink at each site, we had trouble keeping those rules pushed to the phones on every desk. Ultimately, we had to scrap the restrictions as they were a real headache, and we went with an honor system. All international calls for business would be logged for review by the site manager every month. Anybody wanting to make a personal international call had to use their personal AT&T calling card, which they could top up online or with a credit card. After spending a few nights alone in the office with roid rage, I noticed a trend. RR would start his shift, check in with his men at their various positions, patrols on base, and then pick up the phone and talk in hushed tones for hours. It was a fairly large building, and our desks were on opposite sides of the office, so I couldn't ever really make out what he was saying. But I could hear his constant murmur of him speaking to someone on the other end of the phone. It wasn't my business, however, so I largely ignored him. This went on for a couple of months, and as our site manager had to return to the US for a family emergency, the phone logs went unreviewed during that time period. A couple of weeks after the site manager returned, I was summoned to the conference room for a meeting with him and our senior US military and Department of Defense advisors. I could sense the tension in the room, and as I sat down, the site manager slid a manila folder across the table to me. As I opened the folder to reveal pages upon pages of call logs, he said, "Freebase, we know you're usually in the office late at night, and somebody has been making hundreds of international calls during that time and racked up thousands of dollars in phone bills. I hate to say this, but you're our prime suspect at this point, and with theft of this magnitude, we're going to have no choice but to terminate you immediately and bar you from working on any Department of Defense contracts in the future. Unless you have some evidence to the contrary, we're going to have to move forward with termination and remove you from the country on the next supply convoy." I was shocked, and I sat in stunned silence for a couple of seconds, and then it hit me. Those calls were made by RR. Someone hadn't been using their calling card. I immediately protested my innocence and told them that every night RR would get on the phone and at the start of his shift and would still be on the phone as I left around midnight. They then summoned RR to the conference room and confronted him with the records. He begrudgingly admitted it was him and began to spin some BS story about being unable to top off his calling card because his credit cards weren't working and blah blah blah. All the while he's staring at me with eyes of the fiercest degree of rage. We were short on senior PMCs at the time, so a call was made to Baghdad and a decision handed down that RR's employer was to immediately settle the debt with the US government, and RR's salary would be withheld until he worked off the debt with his employer. RR was also put on final warning that any future impropriety whatsoever would be met with immediate termination and removal from Iraq, as well as being blacklisted from working future Department of Defense contracts. For an ex-US Special Forces operator turned mercenary like RR, that would forever spell the end of the DoD contracting gravy train, and he didn't take this threat to his livelihood lightly. Now, any rational person would admit they messed up, tighten up their game, and move on. But RR isn't a rational person by a long shot, and the events that were about to unfold would highlight his irrational and sociopathic nature. After the daily demolition at 1600 hours 4 p.m., I was especially dirty, so I hurried back to the base to beat the evening rush on the shower trailer so I could grab a hot shower before the limited supply of hot water ran out. Our water heaters took forever to heat. Upon entering the shower toilet trailer, I noticed I had the entire place to myself. I savored this rare moment of solitude, used the toilet in peace, disrobed, and stepped into a nice, much-needed hot shower. Just as I was working a nice lather of shampoo into my hair, I hear the door to the shower trailer open. Boots clomp across the floor to my shower stall, and the shower curtain is ripped off its hanger by none other than a very pissed off RR. Seething with rage, he grabbed me by the throat and yanked my wet, naked butt out of the shower and slammed me up against the opposite wall of the trailer, choking me all the while. Now, I'm about 5'11" and a toned 175 pounds, but RR stands 6'4" tall, weighs about 240 pounds, and is a steroid-enhanced, muscle-bound mass of a man. RR's grip on my throat put ever-increasing pressure on my windpipe, and in my oxygen-deprived state, I began to panic. I thrashed about trying to loosen his grip, but in doing so, I expended the limited oxygen I had and felt myself growing weaker by the moment. RR leaned in close to my face and said, "You think you can rat me out like a little bee and there wouldn't be consequences? Let me tell you this, Iraq is the home of unsolved mysteries, and bad crap happens to people every day out here. You better watch your effing back, you BAMFer, because I'm coming for you from every effing angle at every effing opportunity from this moment forward." Just as I felt myself about to black out, he threw me to the floor and gave me a solid kick to the stomach, followed by another to the kidneys, and walked out, leaving me cold, wet, and gasping for air. I pulled myself up onto a nearby bench, caught my breath, and staggered back into the shower in shock. I pissed blood for 2 days after that beating. So much for a peaceful afternoon shower. I made my way to my quarters, sat on my bed, and thought about everything that had just happened. My immediate thought was to report him to the powers that be, but given the circumstances and that he was always armed, I had to plan my next course of action carefully. RR is a steroid-influenced individual and professional killer with his career on the line in the high-stress environment that is Iraq. My fear slowly turned to caution and then evolved into anger. Yes, I'd have to plan my next course of action and ultimate revenge very carefully. For the time being, I decided against reporting him and riding on any convoys he was on. I had been procrastinating setting up a private Wi-Fi network connection to my trailer, but I wasn't going to be caught dead spending any late nights alone in the office with RR in the near future. So I got that set up that night. The night I left my trailer to use the bathroom and The next night, I left my trailer to use the bathroom, and as I passed the office on the way back to my room, I saw RR sitting at his desk by the window on the phone. Why is this guy on the phone all the time, and who is he talking to? Time to investigate. The investigation. I don't want to get off in the weeds in technical jargon, so I'll try to keep this as brief and simple as possible so you can comprehend my next course of action. All of our phones at our site were voice over IP phones, and connected to the local network, which was connected to our satellite uplink. Every voice over IP phone has a unique MAC address, a fingerprint if you will, which identifies it on the network. I had the master list of all devices and phones connected to the network, so I could easily identify the phone RR used every night. Network Instruments makes a little program called Observer, which allows you to monitor all traffic on the network. It even has a cool little feature where you can flag a phone's MAC address, the fingerprint, and tell it to automatically begin capturing traffic on that phone from the moment the phone makes a call until the end of the call. Once the call is complete, it dumps the entire phone call to an audio file, which you can then play back at your leisure. Pretty neat. Time to observe. The analysis. Over the next month, I amassed hours and hours of calls that RR had made, and I finally found out who he was talking to. We already know that RR is a huge piece of crap, but the conversations I listened to took it to a whole other level of douchebaggery. I sat at my desk every day with my headphones in pretending to be listening to music, but in reality I was digesting each and every call, taking notes and marking timestamps of the good stuff. Here's what I found. RR is married and has 3 kids. RR also has a mistress in the US who is a stripper, and by the sounds of it, she's a world-class gold digger. RR spoke to his wife and kids about twice a week on average, but always kept the conversations brief because he was busy running the show in a very dangerous Iraq. As soon as RR would hang up with his family, he'd immediately call his stripper mistress. Let's call her SM. RR made it a point to call and talk to SM for hours every night, however. A douchebag has to have priorities, right? Most of the time, the conversations were pretty nasty phone sex, but others were sprinkled with bits of gold like, hey, the next time I'm effing you in the butt, I'm going to insist on an enema. The last time in Amsterdam, I got a nasty UTI, and frankly, I'm getting tired of the poop on my D all the time. Yeah, of course I hate my wife. She's dumb, and I regret marrying her in the first place. The reason my kids are so stupid is because of her genes. Yes, baby, I promise as soon as I get home, I'm going to divorce her and marry you. Promise. Another memorable conversation involved RR calling his wife and telling her he'd have to cut his next vacation leave to the US short because he was so critical to the operations in Iraq. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to run the place without him. This conversation was followed by an immediate call to SM telling her, yeah, the old lady bought the story hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, ha ha ha. I told you, she's dumb. Yeah, baby, I'll book the tickets, and this time we're going to Paris. We're going to do it big. While these conversations were certainly deplorable, other conversations with SM were more dangerous in nature and severe violations of operational security. Given RR's foul nature, I can kind of understand why he felt it necessary to brag about operations. But man, you're talking to a stripper in the US who has no idea about any of this Iraq stuff anyways. Just make up stuff if you must, but don't actually discuss the specifics of our operation and movements to inflate your pathetic ego. Some of the calls went like this. Yeah, I'm the convoy commander tomorrow. Yep, large and in charge. I'm running at 20 vehicle convoy of flatbed trucks loaded with Scud missiles from Karbala to Amaral tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and all 40 of the guys on the convoy report to me. These missiles are pretty volatile and sensitive, and we'd be a prime target for the bad guys. So I came up with a plan to cover everything with these huge canvas tents we stole off some towelhead goat efforts so we can disguise everything. Heck yeah, I'm smart. This was just one of the many calls of this nature, and the growing frequency of these calls ultimately forced me to cut my investigations short and move to the next phase of my plan. Phase 1 Action. I started studying RR's movements and which convoys he was on and where they were going. If I was going to pull this off, I had to be pretty spot on with my timing. I edited all the calls down to the good stuff and burned 2 CDs for 2 different audiences. RR ran a weekly supply convoy to Baghdad, and one of these CDs needed to be shipped to the US within a week's time. The only way to make that happen was to drop off one of them to DHL at Baghdad International Airport. They always stop by there on the way back to our site to pick up beer and booze at the duty free, which was the only thing open in the airport terminal at that time. So I packaged one CD up and asked a buddy on our convoy to drop it off at DHL for me and told him I'd pay him when he returned. Once the convoy returned to our base, my buddy handed me the receipt and tracking information. Done. Phase 1 is complete. Now it's time for Phase 2. Phase 2 action. The following week, I packaged the other CD up and asked the same buddy on the supply convoy to drop that off to the DoD County Director's Office at the project headquarters. By this time, the first CD was out for delivery in the US, and the second CD would be delivered to Baghdad headquarters in 4 hours. Perfect. Not to pat myself on the back, but the disaster that was about to unfold for RR was the product of patience, dedication, meticulous planning, and flawless execution. The convoy made its way to Baghdad, and the second CD was delivered to headquarters. RR made the usual pass by the airport for the booze run, and then returned later that night. Reaction. The following morning, the entire base awoke to an unusual sound. That unmistakable sound of a whirring of a helicopter blade. The only time we'd ever had a chopper land was for a medevac, medical evacuation, which was for one of our local Iraqi ammo handlers who thought an empty weapons bunker would be a good place to jerk off on his lunch break. That didn't go over so well, and he ended up getting bitten by a viper in his groin area. That's another story for another time though. So this Black Hawk helicopter with overhead Apache escorts lands, and these guys come running out asking for RR and the head of the PMC at our base. They unceremoniously roused RR out of bed along with the head of security and told them they needed to leave immediately for Baghdad. With just the clothes on their back and their body armor, they were whisked away within minutes. As soon as they left, the camp manager approached me and said we needed to have a chat with Baghdad in the conference room. We made our way to the conference room and got a call with our local DoD advisors and the DoD country director in Baghdad. He had listened to the CD and wanted to commend me for blowing the whistle on RR. He also scolded me a bit for not blowing the whistle sooner on the first violation of Operation Security that I had heard. But when I told him the entire story and the brutal assault I endured at the hands of RR in the bathroom, he softened his tone a bit. He concluded the call with assurances that RR would be dealt with swiftly and thanked me for my vigilance. The fallout. What follows was relayed to me by the head of security who traveled with RR on the helicopter to Baghdad. Upon arrival at the helipad at headquarters, a U.S. Army security detail led the two individuals into the DoD country director's office, and RR was confronted with the evidence. The director sat there with the senior advisors present and played the entire CD in front of RR and his supervisors. It was a heated, one-sided conversation, and RR got ripped up one side and down the other. He was ordered to leave the country immediately and would be taken under escort to the U.S. Air Force PAX terminal at Baghdad International Airport upon conclusion of the meeting. He was also notified that he would no longer be eligible to work DoD contracts in the future. The head of the PMC was also excoriated for allowing this behavior to happen on his watch and notified that their security company would now be under investigation for any other possible violations. If the investigation unearthed additional violations, they'd be found in breach of contract, which would be terminated upon transitioning to a new PMC company. That company lasted another 7 months in Iraq. As RR left the meeting under escort, the director turned to him and said, "And tell your effing wife to stop calling here and blowing up the phones. She's pissed off about something, but that's your effing problem to deal with. You need to call her when you get to the airport and tell her to knock that crap off. Moral of the story, don't screw around with your IT guy. P.S. RR, if you're reading this, I hope you're enjoying employing your talents for pennies guarding blood diamond mines for warlords in Africa or whatever hellhole you're stuck in these days. Too long didn't read. Some knuckle-dragging, roid-raging meathead mercenary abused our phone system in Iraq and ran up thousands in phone bills. When I was questioned under suspicion, I told the powers that be that it wasn't me, but was in fact dumbass douchebag. Meathead Merc assaulted me in the shower, choked me out, and thus began the journey of sweet, sweet revenge. Got dirt on him and sent it to his wife, and sent the other dirt to Baghdad headquarters, who immediately fired and ejected him from Iraq, as well as blacklisted him from ever working a DoD contract again. Wow, that was a long story, but wow, what a pretty detailed story. I mean, you can tell that this guy, really went through this stuff. I mean, to know everything to this level of detail and to kind of share kind of these random details, I think this story is true, guys. So what did you guys think of this story, man? So this story is from SuperNova Revenge, posted by Freebase, and I'll include a link to this story in the description below. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. Bye.